Hey friends and fellow bibliophiles, welcome back to Cat's Novel Adventures. Today I am sharing all of the weird stories I read for the week of weird. This would be round 2 this year and it was so much fun, weirdly fun. Week of Weird Round 2 took place during the last week of September from the 24th through the 30th, and it was hosted by Crystal at Fiber Artsy and Jason at Jason's Weird Reads. This was my second time participating in a Week of Weird this year, and I absolutely had a ball participating. I loved the stories that I chose this time around just as much as the ones that I read the first time around. And I discovered 3 new authors. I completed all 5 prompts and I kicked off my Week of Weird with a story by H.P. Lovecraft. One of the many reasons I enjoy participating in the Week of Weird is that I have the opportunity to read some more H.P. Lovecraft. Even though I know who H.P. Lovecraft is, he really is a new to me author. And so for this Week of Weird, I chose Dagon out of a collection called Lovecraft Mythos New and Classic Collection. This collection is one of many that's published by Flame Tree. I apologize for the glare, but it's a beautiful cover. All of their covers are very pretty. But Dagon I used for the prompt of Old Weird, and that was for you to read a story or a book that was written or published in the 1900s, specifically from 1900 through the 1960s. This story was published in 1919. It was actually written in 1917. And it is a short story that H.P. Lovecraft wrote, one of his first stories that he wrote as an adult. It was published in a publication called The Vagrant. It was actually in the number 11 issue. The story begins with an unknown narrator telling his story of when he went to sea with a cargo boat and it was seized by some German sea raiders. And then his adventure begins because he decides to escape in a small boat. He ends up drifting out in the middle of the ocean and at some point hits an isolated area to the point that he is able to actually get out of the boat and go exploring. And he makes a terrifying discovery that ends up haunting him for the rest of his life. In my opinion, the narrator is unreliable. We find out that he is addicted to morphine because of this horrifying ordeal, like he needs something to help him cope with what he went through. But did he really experience this horrifying ordeal once he escaped from the cargo boat? Maybe perhaps this is all a manifestation in his mind because of the trauma of being captured by the German sea raiders and then him escaping and being out on the ocean for who knows how long. I mean, he had to experience lots of sun and dehydration. So it's possible that this is all a hallucination and perhaps maybe a way for him to cope with the trauma of what he experienced on the cargo boat. While I enjoy H.P. Lovecraft's writing style, I really love how descriptive he is, and his stories tend to flow really well. And in this particular story, the beginning grabbed my attention immediately. I loved how the tension built up, especially when the narrator was exploring this isolated area. However, I wanted more. I wanted more details. I wanted more backstory about this narrator, and I wanted more monster. For me, this short story read more like a prologue for a much bigger story, and I didn't really connect with the narrator at all. I just kind of felt like I could see his hopelessness and kind of feel his despair to a point, But I almost even wondered if his hopelessness or his despair or the reasons he was feeling this way and having to take the morphine was more about guilt that he felt because he escaped the cargo boat. I mean, we don't know if anybody survived from that cargo ship or not. He was out there for so long. Who knows? So you almost wonder, who's the real monster? I'm giving it 3 stars. And the only reason I'm giving it 3 stars is because I wanted more to this story. It was fine. And I know that it is the beginning of the Cthulhu mythos. And I do, in all fairness, have to read more H.P. Lovecraft, especially with the Cthulhu part, those stories, so that I can see where this puzzle piece fits in. So as of right now, I'm giving it the 3 stars, but who knows if later on down the road, when I reread it, that I might change my mind. The second short story that I read was for the prompt, What a Strange Trip, and you were to read a translated piece of weird fiction. Well, this is totally new to me, and this was also a new prompt for the week of weird. So I had to do a little research, and I came across an article on electriclit.com that had different translated short story collections. For this particular story, which is called The Lonely Bodybuilder, I was able to actually click on a link and read it on electriclit.com. So I will leave a link for both the website where I found the article as well as for this particular short story if anybody is interested in reading it. But The Lonely Bodybuilder is part of a collection of stories of the same title, and it was written by Yukiko Motoya, and it is translated by Asa Yoneda. This short story is about a lonely housewife who is basically ignored by her workaholic husband. So she decides one day that she is going to train to be a bodybuilder. And it radically changes not only her appearance, but also her mindset. This is a story about loneliness. It's also a story about maybe having regret when you don't take an opportunity when it presents itself, but it's also a story about liberation. I found that what makes this story weird is that it's the normalcy of living life, going to work, having, day-to-day chores, watching television, and then all of a sudden coming up with an idea to do something that may seem so outlandish to other people around you. Another thing that I found interesting was that the author did not name any of the characters, and I'm almost wondering if the reason they were not named is because our main character is not seen by her husband, and perhaps when you're not named, you're not seen. I mean, that's the only thing I could really think about with that, but I did find that pretty interesting. I love how the main character decides that she wants to be a bodybuilder despite her age, despite the type of job she has. She works at like a cosmetic counter where she demonstrates moisturizers and makeup and stuff like that. So when she actually starts transforming, it really is noticeable when she does her demonstrations. But the sad reality is her husband never seems to notice until she ends up having a meltdown, which is so unusual for her character. I like the story, and I really do want to check out more of this author's short stories in her collection in the future. It was a 4-star read for me. My third story was for the prompt, Out of This World, which was to read a story or a book with science fiction elements. And I chose the story, The Galactic Tourist Industrial Complex by Tobias S. Buckle. This was originally published in an anthology back in 2019 called New Suns, Original Speculative Fiction by People of Color. I actually listened to this short story on the podcast LeVar Burton Reads, and they have a new element to their storytelling. It's this immersive soundtrack that's added where you get some sound effects, and it also can manipulate LeVar Burton's voice. It really does add a layer of enjoyment to it. And of course, you know, it's LeVar Burton. You can't go wrong with listening to anything by him. But this is about a young guy named Tabby who happens to be a cab driver in New York City. What makes it weird is that he is driving alien tourists around Manhattan. So it's like Earth is a playground for wealthy alien tourists, and they come to Earth, and everything goes pretty well between the two species as long as no aliens get hurt. Well, Tabby gets an alien in his cab who decides to get a little overexcited, and there are some fatal consequences. And this causes some interesting and stressful moments for Tabby. I thought it was a terrific story. I really did love the world that was created. I loved the interactions between the aliens as well as the humans. And I love the character of Tabby. I think he did a great job trying to deal with the stressful situation because he gets visited from people from Earth as well as a visitor from the alien planet. And because of this situation, things change between the aliens and the humans. But I will say Tabby comes out of it pretty okay, but the humans as a whole might want to watch their step in the future. It was a 4-star read for me, and I would highly recommend this story for anyone who likes science fiction because it was well written and it also had some humor in it. Kind of dry humor, but still humor all the same. The 4th story that I read was for the prompt of New Weird, and that was to read a story or a book that was written between the 1970s and the present, and I chose Open House on Haunted Hill by John Wiswell. This story was originally published by Diabolical Plots magazine in June 2020, and I went ahead and listened to this one also on LeVar Burton Reads. It is the story of a haunted house that is put on the market by Mrs. Weiss, a local real estate agent. It knows it must behave so that it can find the right family to keep it company because our house is lonely. It's haunted by loneliness. And it waits for people to come in and out, checking it out, but people come and go, and it doesn't get excited until a widower shows up with his 4-year-old rambunctious daughter. The house is delighted until the young girl gets hurt. This is a heartwarming haunted house story. I absolutely love that the haunted house is our narrator. In fact, I want to share with you the first paragraph of the story because it shows great characterization. It also shows heart and humor, but I love it. 133 Poisonwood Avenue would be stronger if it was a killer house. There is an estate at 35 Silver Street that annihilated a family back in the 1800s, and its roof has never sprung a leak since. In 2007, it still had the power to trap a bickering couple in an endless hedge maze that was physically only 300 square feet. 35 Silver Street is a show-off. So poor 133 Poisonwood, it just wants to find a family that will love it. It doesn't want to scare anyone, so it wants to make sure that it can find the right family. I love the description of the house itself. I love that it has a secret room. I also really do like the fact that it can share its feelings. There's a part where the dad points out the loose wallpaper, and it's like the house gets shy and a little embarrassed about it. I really enjoy haunted house stories, and if anyone would love to listen to one that's a little more heartwarming instead of horrifying, I would totally recommend this story. I gave it 5 stars. It's one that I think that I would love to revisit again in the future. The last story that I read was for the prompt The Dark, where you read a story or a book with horror or supernatural elements. And I chose a novella from my The Woman in Black and Other Ghost Stories by Susan Hill. It was called The Small Hand, and it was the last story that I needed to read in this collection, and I absolutely enjoyed it. This is the story of Adam Snow, an antique book dealer who gets lost driving home from his client's house. And he ends up at this abandoned house that has an overgrown garden attached to it. Well, he's pretty curious as to what would cause this house to go to ruin. So he gets out and he starts wandering around the garden. He ends up having this weird sensation of a small hand, a child's hand, creeping into his own hand. But there is no one there. So it freaks him out and he ends up leaving the property in a hurry, and he eventually makes it home. Well, after that, he ends up having some weird occurrences. It's like he can't escape this small hand that continues to want to hold him, to the point even sometimes it's not even in a friendly way. So there are a lot of twists to the story, and it has an ending that I was not expecting. I will say that I did make some connections before the narrator did, but I did not see that ending coming. I loved it. I really do enjoy Susan Hill's writing. She's very descriptive. This story has some mystery to it. It's obviously a ghost story. It also has some family connections to it. There's sorrow in it, but there's also a lot of gothic vibes to it. I love so much about the story. It's the kind of story, like many of the others in her collection, where you just want to grab a cozy blanket and you want a hot beverage and you just want to nestle in with the ghost stories because it's so good. It's got a creep factor to it. Now, it is what I would consider like a slow burn, but I don't mind those. And again, it also has an abandoned house in it, and I like abandoned houses and haunted houses, and I also like ghost stories a lot. I ended up giving this a 5-star. Well, that's my week of weird. I really had a great time. I enjoyed all of the stories that I read, and I really love discovering some new authors. Thanks again, Crystal and Jason, for hosting another wonderful week of weird. How about you? Did you participate in Week of Weird? Did you have a favorite short story or a book? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate you stopping by. In the meantime, stay amazing and be adventurous.